it's mikevsbeer. Welcome to Breweries of America. We are in Cedar Springs, Michigan. That's 20 miles north of Grand Rapids. And I'm standing in front of Cedar Springs Brewing Company. It has an authentic German flair as indicated by the lederhosen on their logo. We are going to be meeting with their Director of Happiness, Dave Ringler, who has spent time in Germany perfecting the art of German craft beers. I'm excited to share this with all of you. So let's head on inside and see what they got for everyone. I'm here in Cedar Springs at the Cedar Springs Brewing Company. This is David Ringler. Dave, do you prefer?
Either way is fine.
Either way. He is the owner, the founder, and they've created...
The Director of Happiness here at Cedar Springs.
I love that moniker.
And we're a little taste of Munich without the plane ticket. So.
And that's, I mean, economically, this is the best of both worlds.
The whole idea really with the space was to create something that wasn't necessarily kitsch that you see sometimes, and especially older establishments, but honestly, Munich is a modern, vibrant city. I will be there in a week and a half.
Fantastic.
And the intention with this is you could drop this in downtown Munich and not miss a beat. So yeah. Honestly, you would feel, with the exception of the TVs that are on the wall, because it's a football day today.
Yeah.
But you know, you really could drop this right in the center of Munich, and no one would not accept it as being normal.
Yeah. And you can pan around, and what you're going to see is they have the bench-style communal seating where you come in, you just sit down with a group of strangers, and you become fast friends, just communicating and enjoying beers together. And it's really a bridge that connects people instantly. Like, community is what you're creating here.
And that's one of the cool things when we did this. I mean, Americans sometimes would be shy about sitting with people that they don't know, but the idea is that you break a little bread, and by the time you finish your experience, hopefully you've made a new friend. And we've really seen this in this town. Cedar Springs, we were the first new construction in 40 years in this town.
Wow.
And we found that people would come and sit at one of our community tables, and they'd meet somebody who was from Cedar Springs, who had also been here their whole lives, and they'd never really met, and now they're meeting every Tuesday. So you're creating some of those connections, and if you think about it, beer halls and public houses were really the social media of their day before we had these things attached to our hips.
Totally.
You know, people did meet and had a cup of coffee or enjoyed a beer and talked, and that was the way that they made those connections and exchanged news and argued politics and gossip and everything else, you know, back before we had social media, Facebook, all the rest of that stuff.
For sure. And now I'm an independent. I've never come here before, so this is my first time stepping foot.
You're not a virgin anymore.
Not anymore, but son of German immigrants. Every fourth summer I spent growing up in Germany. My father.
Wie ist dein Deutsch?
Ja, wir können Deutsch schwätzen, reden. Meine Mutti ist Schwäbisch, so ich
Schwäbisch, okay. Ich habe an der Grenze von Schweden gewohnt. So ich bin 2,5 Jahre in Landsberg am Lech. Das ist zwischen Oberbayern und Schwaben.
Oh, so. Sehr schön. Sehr, sehr schön.
Und das Essen ist auch genial.
Ja, meine Mutti hat immer zu Hause am Sonntags Spätzle gemacht mit Rouladen oder Dampfnudeln und Kässpätzle. Es war fantastisch. Es war super.
We have a cool video on our YouTube channel that'll show you how we make our Spätzle right here in house.
Really? So. With the Spätzle machine or with the board?
Well, ours is a little bigger, but yes.
Okay.
Not the machine, no, ours is a board.
Right. Now mein Vater kommt aus in Köln. So Köln. Okay. Yeah. So in Germany, beers are regionally specific.
Germany was not unified until 1871. So yes, a lot of people, and that was when I kind of referred to kitsch restaurants, you know, people have it say, oh, this is German. Well, Germany really is a new thing. It did not, there were the Germanic peoples, but the Germany as a country did not exist until 1871. So there's a lot of regional differences that are religious, economic based.
Right.
And so the cuisine also varies tremendously as you travel around the country. Obviously there's some common threads, but, you know, meat and taters, but a lot of the differences are stark as you travel around Germany. Our menu and our beer traditions come strictly from Oberbayern. shouldn't say strictly. We borrow, but and our kitchen staff travels every other year to train in Germany, and then our brewing staff travels every other year to train in Germany. So we're really trying to bring a little bit of that flavor here and share with my home here in West Michigan.
Right now, this is a brewery that's been open for 8 years. They have a list of awards as long as my arm for
I've got a few of them up here.
Oh, yeah. I was reading about it. Best German beer, best craft beer, best small brewery. Like, you have a lot to be proud of. I can't wait. Let's get into the brewery if you don't mind. That's what the viewers really want to see, because they can come here, and I want them to come here. I want them to seek this place out, like make it a destination. But most people, let's admit it, they aren't going to have the opportunity to see what happens behind the scenes. And that's the purpose of this program.
Let's double check real quick to make sure they're not in the middle of something, because Matt, one of our two guys, is here today. So let's make sure that it's cool for us to go in.
Lead the way.
All right, well, let's take a look back into the brew house then. We are draft only, so everything's in kegs. Which, at its theory, is the purest form of beer, as the brewmaster intended. Although I use the term brewmaster loosely as well, that is actually a degree. Again, you see people that, but obviously in the U.S. it's not necessarily a legal thing, but in most countries it is a degree. It's a diplom Braumeister. You actually have a certificate that that you did achieve an educational proficiency to be a master brewer.
Wow.
Otherwise, you're a brewer or a head brewer, whatever. That's totally fine. But the actual title of brewmaster is something that should be earned.
A lot of respect around that term, right?
Should be, exactly. So, again, you're going to hear the boiler kick on a little bit. We're a small brew house, 15 barrel. We had one, I think we use a German process in here. So because we are steam heating, we step mash everything, even our English or our American craft beers. We do not, we have the capability to caulk. We don't do that necessarily because we're achieving the same results with our protein rest by step mashing.
Can you explain step mashing?
Step mashing is during the mash-in process, we're holding grains at certain temperature to get an enzymatic conversion. We believe we're getting a little more flavor out of the malt.
Okay,
a lot of people will say nowadays you don't need to do that because the malts are so refined, but we think you're getting a little more out of the grain that is often left behind. And we don't have to hammer everything with hops or other ingredients to get those full flavors. And I think you'll notice that a little bit with the roundness of the flavor as we sample some beers a little later on.
Fantastic. And you really, the whole brewing process is a chemistry.
Or alchemy or whatever you want to call it.
I mean,
the process is the same, whether you're a home brewer or you're a large Heineken or Anheuser-Busch. We're converting fermentable sugars and grain, and we're bringing it to the glass. I mean, that process is really the same. There's just a few things we do in the Germanic tradition here that we needed some specialization in the brew house. And my point is that we tried, to manipulate an off-the-rack system. Most of American craft is based on English-style brewing, so it's all infusion mash, single temperature mash.
Right.
Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but we weren't really able to do what we wanted to do.
Sure.
So by the time we got done with all these additions, it made more sense for us to build this ourselves, was the long way of getting to the story. So we actually had a local college drafting student create drawings for us, and we worked with a local steel roller and a home brewing equipment manufacturer, and we made our own brew house. We do open fermentation as well on our wheat beers, and I think you'll taste that as well as you're getting some of those estery flavors and aromas on the Bavarian style wheat beers. So a couple little differences between what we do in a typical English style system. A 15 barrel system, everything is produced here. We have a couple of fermenters in here, and then we have the 5 that you saw above the bar in the tap room. And if you go to some historical breweries in Europe, a lot of times the top floor will be the malting floor. Look at that. And they would operate right with gravity, and that would just flow down as they got to the cellar by the time they're actually lagering or storing beer. Nowadays, that's completely separate. So you have a maltster that will do the malting, and then a brewer that will take the malts at this point then and start the mash process, the brewing process. We buy from a maltster. Now, what malting is, a maltster will take grain from a field. It's a seed,
Yep.
and there's starches in the seed or sugars in that seed, and those sugars are complex. And when that seed germinates, so it's moistened and it will begin to germinate, it's thinking it's starting to grow.
Yep.
And there is a chemical conversion that takes place in that seed, and it will start to break down complex sugars into simple sugars that a seedling can digest to begin to grow.
The food source, yeah.
A food source. Not coincidentally, yeast can also use those simple sugars for their life process, which creates alcohol, carbon dioxide, and what we call fermentation, right?
Sure.
Well, at a certain point, the maltster will then stop that process by heating or kilning those grains, and they'll stop the germination process. And so now you have a grain with simple sugars that's then roasted or toasted, and that's where our color is coming from, how it's being kilned. If you're putting bread in a toaster for a short time, it's very light. A little longer, it's red or brown. And if you put it in for a long time, you're going to get dark colored grain, which sometimes we associate with coffee, and it's not the coffee necessarily that we're associating, it's the roasting that we're getting. Exactly. Coffee bean, when it's raw, is green.
Right.
It's roasted, and we get those coffee flavors that we're getting.
Yep.
Exactly. So by the time we then get that malt here in the brew house, and we can then mix and match those malts to get the body that we're looking for in the ultimate final beer.
Perfect. So where is, let's say, your mash tun?
Mash
That's where the process starts, right?
Yep. Mash tun is the first vessel here, and then we have a kettle that's the second. We actually will mash into the kettle because, again, we want to be able to control the temperature.
Okay. Yep.
We will move over to loiter, where we will separate the husk from the sugars themselves, strain that, go back into the kettle where we're boiling, adding hops. We have space here for a second kettle. Eventually, this building was built to take this wall completely out, was the original idea, and we can add more cellar space and expand.
Gotcha. Can we go up on your gantry here?
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
Your gantry, but your catwalk?
Yep, you bet.
So fantastic.
And then
2 mash tuns.
Well, we're mashing into the kettle.
Okay,
we're moving over to loiter.
Okay.
And then we will come back to cook in the mash.
So it's a back and forth process.
Correct.
Okay.
And then we have a separate kettle here that would allow you to go a little faster, because you can mash into one, cook in the other, and you could have then a linear process rather than a circular process.
Fantastic. It's an automatic pump system transferring.
Correct.
And how many gallons is this?
15 barrel by 31, so you're about 500, a little less than 500 gallons per batch.
Nice batch.
Yep.
Nice batch.
Yep. And then the whirlpool here is for separating solids as you get done.
Yeah, fantastic. And you do some dry hopping in there on the
We do very little dry hopping. Again, that's a little bit more from the English tradition.
Oh,
and nowadays American tradition.
Sure, yeah.
Hops. A lot of what German is, it's not necessarily always extreme flavors. It's about balance and subtlety.
Nice.
When we drink a lot of these beers later on, you may notice a little of this and a little of that in there, and it's there. But you can also just sit back and go, "Isn't this great?" and enjoy time with your friends.
Yeah.
It's a conversational beverage. It's not really necessarily meant to whack you in the head with a 2x4, right?
Right. Like an IPA, like a triple IPA. It's like, whoa.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier. You know, a brew master is a trained thing. Well, when people go through schooling and training, there's a certain ways they would do things, right?
Yep.
One of the cool things about the American experience here is that you had a lot of people that said that, learned a little bit about this, a lot of times on their own. Well, if a little bit is good, a lot's better. The explosion of creativity and pushing the limits that has taken place in the United States, in the craft brewing world here over the past 40 to 50 years, is probably equal to all the creativity and experimentation that took place in the rest of the centuries-long brewing tradition in other regions.
It's like tracking with technology, right?
Well, there was nobody saying you can't do that.
Right.
You can, sure, if you want to try it. I mean, let's throw this in there too. Why not? Let's see what it does.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more of that here. Some of it was amazing and wonderful. There's a fair share of it that didn't turn out so good.
Yeah.
I'm sure. But it was a very different mentality, certainly, as the brewing world evolved very, very quickly, in the U.S. as opposed to, these subtle advances that would maybe take place in more traditional brewing environments, whether that be England, Germany, Czech.
So in essence, this half of your brewery, this is where all the brewing happens, and now you have your fermentation vessels, and you have some stuff on top too.
Right. So the brewing process starts in here. The grain will mash in.
Yep.
We'll separate husk, and then grain out on that side. We have local pig farmers that will use our spent grain. Right.
Yep.
Come back, cook, add your hops, go into the whirlpool, separate solids. Then we go to the heat exchange and cool down.
Yep.
And then fermentation. Fermentation takes place over here
Yep.
or upstairs. So you can run this process, depending on the style of beer, about 8 hours, 7 to 10 hours. So you could theoretically run this 2 or 3 times a day, right? Easily enough. By the time you get to fermentation, depending on what you're doing for the style of beer, ales tend to take 2 to 3 weeks. Lagers will be 5 to 8 weeks, depending on what you're doing. So that's your bottleneck.
Yeah, sure.
That's your bottleneck. So as I mentioned earlier, this was built to expand out. If we added more cellar space, we can brew more often, right? Or have larger fermenters. Again, this isn't meant necessarily to be a volume enterprise right now, but a quality and a slower process by hand. But we certainly could expand this. This is the stop gap that determines what our volume is how much cellar space that you actually have.
Awesome. Yeah, you noticed that. As soon as you said you could expand that way, you have property, open property behind you, real estate that, if that's in your future plans, you certainly can do that. But you got everything you need right here. You don't need to have a massive volume of space. We talked about Salt Brewery. They do everything in this small basement of a former church.
Right.
Like it's like cramped quarters, but that's all you need.
Right.
And
well, especially when you're primarily serving. I mean, 75% of our it was down to close to 50-50, but currently it's about 75% of our volume is on one of our 2 tap rooms.
Fantastic.
So we redistribute some, but it's not a tremendous amount.
Right.
Prior to the pandemic, we had about 80 bars and restaurants that were pouring our product. We were closer to 50-50.
Yeah.
But we pulled back in the pandemic and really focused on our location here. And we really haven't moved too much from that.
Perfect. I like it.